to give us some more reaction to the history that was made last week there at the Vatican and what's next for Pope Leo. We are now joined by the Bishop of the Diocese of Tyler, Bishop Greg Kelly, live in studio.
Good morning, Nolan. Good to be back. Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming in. I really appreciate it. So on Thursday, I think it was around 11 o'clock when we found out the news around that time. When you found out
11:08.
11:08?
Yep.
When you found out that Robert Prevost, Cardinal Robert Prevost, was named the new Pope, what was going through your head?
Well, actually, I mean, we saw the white smoke at 11:08, so we gathered all the staff at the Chancery office in Tyler and waited till about 12:34, I think, for him to walk out. And I mean, to me, it was just astounding. I mean, I don't know him. I know the name. I've seen the name on the list of a cardinal from the United States, but you know, most of the cardinals in the United States are also archbishops in major dioceses. So his was just a name on a list. I didn't know anything about him. I really had to learn about him.
Why do you think, from what you've heard so far, he was the choice?
You know, from what I can take, just understanding his own biography, that he's from the United States. He spent most of his active ministry in Peru, or 20 years of that. He was also the Superior General for the Augustinian Order throughout the world, and then most recently the head of the dicastery for bishops. So I think just he has an experience of a lot of the church throughout the world.
Were you expecting the conclave process to be a little bit longer than it was? It was about 2 days.
It was. You know, I have no expectation. I mean, I see so many faces on the internet of people, you know, making predictions or handicapping or having a short list or whatever, and I think, I have no idea who it's going to be. I have no idea how it's going to long. I'm just going to pray that the Holy Spirit choose the right person through the cardinals.
And since he's the first American to become Pope of the Catholic Church, what do you think this means for Americans that happen to be Catholics right now, and especially finding out the news last Thursday?
You know, it's a source of pride. I think it's a source of wonder. I think especially for his brothers in the Augustinian Order, for the people of Chicago, for the White Sox fans. You know, he's a South Side boy from what I hear, and so I think it's that. But also really know that he is, in a sense, the Pope for the whole Church. You know, but to hear the Pope speaking in English in an American accent is just, it's astounding to me.
Yeah, it's definitely something we're definitely not used to, and I'm sure you've seen it when he walked out of the balcony there. You can see the roar of the crowd there around the Vatican. It seemed like the whole world kind of erupted as they saw who the next Pope was. What was your take on that moment that really was emotional and brought chills down the spine of a lot of people watching that?
I think so. I mean, I think just the fact that we had a new Pope in and of itself is an amazing thing, no matter who it is. And I think the added-on surprise of who it was and that he was a Pope from the United States, I think that just increased it immensely. Yeah, I found it to be a very moving moment.
What did you make of his speech there on the balcony?
What stood out for me, actually two things stood out for me from that. First was the choice of the name. You know, that you think, well, what is Leo XIV? First, it harkens back to Leo XIII, who at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, was the first pope to really try to address the gospel to the conditions of the working person, you know, the effects of the Industrial Revolution on labor, on families, to try to see, you know, what does the church have to say to that? And that also harkens back to Leo I, who was pope in the middle of the 5th century, and really kind of raised the profile of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, because of his intervention in a controversy over the nature of Christ. You know, there were big controversies in the first centuries, and also, I mean, he walked out of Rome to meet Attila the Hun and talk to him face to face to turn him aside from invading and sacking the city of Rome. So he was a man of great courage. So I kind of connected to both of those. Yeah.
And for somebody who doesn't know or is not familiar with how that process works, when a pope gets named, they choose their name. How does that work, and what are the things that go into that? I
mean, I think that it really comes out of the genius of the man. I mean, Pope Francis chose Francis. I mean, that's the first time that we'd ever had a Pope Francis. And I think for Robert Prevost, it's a very deliberate choice to link him to Leo the 13th, I think, and also to the first century Leo. I've not had a chance to look at the other Leos in between, but I think I've not yet heard what he has to say about it himself.
I know you wanted to talk about his first words, Pope Leo XIV, where he talked about peace be with you. I believe that was his first words addressing the people around the Vatican there. What did you make of that?
I mean, that was the other thing that stood out besides the choice of the name, was his first words were the words that that the risen Lord says to the disciples, to Mary Magdalene on the morning of the resurrection. So it kind of harkens all the way back, to the very beginnings of our faith, and the putting Christ at the center, and his words of peace. And he's very much, in a lot of his initial homilies and speeches, he's spoken about the need for peace and the prayer for peace, in Ukraine and Gaza and the other troubled areas of the world. Mm-hmm.
How do you think he's set to lead the church right now? I know he talked about he wants to continue what Pope Francis did for the Catholic Church, but what are you expecting with that?
When I was thinking about that, when Bishop Burns came to the Diocese of Dallas in 2017, Bishop, now Cardinal Farrell, had gone to Rome. A reporter asked him, he said, you've got big shoes to fill here, because Bishop Farrell had a great effect on the Diocese of Dallas. And I always remember Bishop Burns' response. He said, I don't plan to fill his shoes, I plan to build on his work. And I expect that Pope Leo will build on the work of Pope Francis, but he will bring his own personality, his own training, his own spirituality to that. Mm-hmm.
What do you personally want to see from him over the years ahead?
I'm just anxious to listen to him, especially, coming out of the Augustinian tradition, which focuses so much on the work of St. Augustine. And Augustine speaks so much, at least in his most famous saying, of the yearning of the human heart, that we're hardwired for God. He famously said, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts will ever be restless until they rest in you. And I think there's so much restlessness and so much lack of peace in the human heart that tries to fill it with so many different things, that we're really made for God. And how do we keep Jesus at the front and center of the preaching of the gospel? Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's early right now. What do you make of his public appearances so far?
Yeah, I think just that kind of graciousness towards journalists, towards, and again, the call for peace. I also noted in his first homily on the morning of after his election, in fact, I even brought the text with me because he speaks very much to people in authority like myself, and he said at the very end of his homily that for all those who in the church who exercise a ministry of authority, it is to move aside so that Christ may remain, to make oneself small so that he may be known and glorified. And he quotes John the Baptist where he says, of Jesus, he must increase, I must decrease. And then the very last words, to spend oneself to the utmost so that all may have the opportunity to know and love him. I think that's our work as leaders in the church, but also the mission of the whole church, that Christ may be known and loved. Mm-hmm.
Obviously, again, like I said, it was early, but you spoke about it a little bit in the last segment, that you were fascinated that Pope Leo XIV exactly chose that name. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit?
I think it kind of takes it back behind, some of the tensions, the controversies of the last several years, and takes it back to a different layer of the church, that we are a church that's 20 centuries old. And I think it takes it back again to Leo XIII in the 19th century, who really introduced a whole new line of thinking. How does the church respond to the conditions of the modern world, especially for working families, for laborers, for people who are on the margins. Pope Francis did so much to talk about people who are on the margins and the need for the church, the church to go out to them and to be a field hospital where they find healing. But subsequent popes after Leo XIII, Pius XI, John Paul II, they kind of picked up on Leo XIII's line of thinking and kept expanding it, and talking about it. How do we speak to the conditions of the modern world? The Second Vatican Council very much wanted to address how do we preach the gospel in the conditions of the modern world in a way which is faithful to the gospel, but also accessible to people now in their language and culture and the things that they experience in the world, the things that weigh on their hearts.
And then finally, Bishop Kelly, how does Pope Leo XIV continue to unite the Catholic Church over the years ahead? What does he need to do?
I think that he, again, I think just needs to exercise that ministry. Some of it is really symbolic in terms of just the person of the Pope, but also I think the way in which he will speak about peace, because that's a universal need. The peace within the heart, a peace within families, among nations, among the world. I think that's just such a great need for all of us now.